Alrighty, everyone, appreciate everyone joining us here. Emergency podcast on the PH Next Rising podcast. We have not been here in a emerging podcast for a little bit and a little bit sooner than we would have liked to, but Phoenix Rising have officially parted ways with head coach Danny Stone, the nail in the coffin being last night's 5-1 loss against Memphis 901. Danny Stone departs with a 5-6-6 record as head coach. He has been with the club since March 2021, serving as an assistant coach under Rick Shantz. Listen, we have talked about that there was a very much immense pressure for the role coming off of a 2023 USL Championship winning season. Multiple factors, including poor form, a bit of shuffling within the starting 11, and honestly, a lack of recruitment. There's a lot of things that we are going to get into, but right off the top, I'm Matt Simpson, joined by Owen Evans, who is from an airport lounge, I believe. We are coming to you live. Owen, there's a lot to kind of digest here. How are we feeling? What are we doing?
As you mentioned, I'm currently in an airport lounge in DFW. I've just had to change my flight back to Phoenix to make sure that I'm not running after we get off of this to the opposite end of the airport. But I always joke that this news always happens when I'm traveling. This was not expected. I said yesterday that I knew there was pressure on Danny. I knew that there was some degree of discontent after previous performances. You know, it was one of those things. It was said to me in one case that an owner, they weren't happy after El Paso with the performance. Another owner has been mentioned to me, was in the South End ones, asking questions about what people thought about Danny. These kind of things were evidently, it was clear at that point that the pressure was on Danny, and it was clear as well that some things that potentially were within his control weren't going as well as they should have. You only have to have a quick look in some of the messages that I get from people in and around the club, and you can sense that there are certain things that are problematic. However, this wasn't expected to me. It feels very knee-jerk. I'll also emphasize as well, because I'm not sure, did you mention, Max, about the naming of Diego Gomez as interim head coach in the moment? The first message I had regarding that was effectively saying that they hope the club's got a real plan, because Diego Gomez is not a long-term solution. And I'm going to put that out there right now. I do not believe that Diego and the locker room will accept that as a permanent solution at this time. So this is a chaotic time. I'm surprised it happened now. I spoke to you, Max, before, and obviously, right, we constantly text each other. We're constantly trying to work these things out. What's the reality of it? I told Max I felt that next weekend was the critical one. San Antonio, a team that are struggling. You then get on, you have a weekend off. That was almost the natural time, if you were going to make a change, that you would do so. They've instead pulled the trigger now. Rising flew back this morning, early morning flight direct from Memphis into Phoenix, and they'd have arrived there a few hours ago. And clearly then this news has broken since then. So I'm surprised, I think, is the easiest way to put it. There's a lot of things we could go into here. I'm just intrigued if they have anyone lined up, because, again, from everything that I've heard, they're going to need someone lined up.
Yeah. No, and that's honestly a pretty good encapsulation of really where we've kind of been talking over, the last couple of weeks of, right, the pressure very much was building. It was detailed further on last night's post game in the clip that you had with Danny Stone. We are going to replay that clip later in this emergency podcast, just for good context for everyone. But yeah, man, I mean, listen, I agree with you. Like we were saying, if something was going to happen, you would expect maybe the more if you're going off of kind of the timing of everything, it might have been after that San Antonio match. If it's a poor San Antonio team away from home, you have a week off in between, again, coinciding in a way of when, like you're mentioning, you could have a deeper dive look into better recruitment, international players coming in. Yes, that's not a safe gap or a fail safe or anything like we said, but at least you're able to stock up on possible reinforcements and not just go in with this is going to be our one solution for right now. Now, I think the very interesting thing here, like you keep on mentioning, is yes, Diego Gomez is named at the moment for the interim, the caretaker manager, if you will. The real big question, and we'll get into this further because I want to keep right the focus on Danny Stone for now. But the question that's going to be moving forward is, when do they make that long-term solution, and who will that be? Is it going to be, are they going to try to fit someone in during that week off? Is this going to be something where this is later in the season? There's a lot of questions that have to be answered. But for right now, turning it back to Danny Stone, again, we kind of sat a couple weeks ago when Rising were playing, their home match, and you're going into it with a 5-5-5 record going into Charleston Battery. When you're playing them at home, it was very much just a finals rematch. And my word, how differently things have looked since last November. And it's not all. Listen, we've been saying this the entire time. This is not all on Danny Stone. Very much people can paint that. Yes, were some tactical nuances different, and maybe we had ourselves scratching our heads. Very much so. I think that how you kind of seen that Charleston game was such a great encapsulation of where these two clubs have been since that finals rematch, right? Charleston has very much maintained their position within the top of the East. They've kept a lot of their core players and reloaded. Phoenix Rising, yes, they brought in some guys specifically along the defense, a little bit in the midfield, but by and large, they have absolutely lost a ton of their attacking talent and have not replenished it. Yes, they're going through a coaching change. Yes, this happened very early on, right before the season started. When you're looking at it in hindsight with where Phoenix Rising has fallen, where Danny Stone was ultimately cost his job with the news of today, him parting ways. You look at this and you're thinking this is a combination of, a lot of poor recruitment and not having as much resources, being very late within the appointment of the role, not being able to acclimate with the team. And then within the role, you're kind of filling out your lumps and knowing that this pressure that this team was on, you really didn't have the time to do it. And it showed today in today's decision.
Oh, we've got to be honest here. We're talking about what the long-term plan is going forward for this club. If it's the same as they've been dealing with the striker role, maybe they'll have someone in place by next year. Maybe they'll look to promote from within and whatever other things. I don't know. Maybe you'll pick someone who's only ever going to get half of the output that you actually need, and not bother to go with another one to make up for what you're losing. All of these have been serious questions that have plagued this team for a while, and the problem you've got now again is, look, right? If we have to be honest in this one, were there elements of what Danny did that were probably caused himself more problems than he should have? Yeah, there were. It wasn't a secret, I think, that the locker room at times lacked fight. The locker room at times felt that there were lack of direction at time, and some of the performances just weren't up to scratch. Last night really encapsulated that. But at the same time, these problems run deeper. These problems run deeper in this club. The issue going into this season it's not just all things that you can easily square the blame at Danny's feet. And the question now is the club has to sit back and review these things, has to be, okay, who else is taking blame here? Because it can't just be an assumption now that Danny's gone, it'll be fine, everything will be okay, because that's not true. That isn't true, and that's not a true reflection on what we have seen so far this season. It is not a true reflection in some ways of what we've seen at this club in terms of certain areas of it, quite frankly, for years. So there are much deeper, much more serious questions that have to be answered here. And my fear is that Danny in this case will be used as the scapegoat. Will be used as the sacrificial person that's kind of thrown out there and effectively just, it must have been him, it must have been his fault. We'll move on now. And that's not going to resolve some of these deeper underlying problems that this team still has and will continue to have. I mean, the striker situation still isn't resolved. It's going to be at least until, the middle of it's the middle of July, isn't it? Is when the FIFA TMS opens. And from everything that we hear, that's what they're kind of waiting on at the moment, for international transfers, international clearance. But those issues there just look in terms of it, and I'll I think as well, we'll put our hands up as well and say, look, we said at the start of the season, Danny Stone made obvious sense at the time as a person to go there. So we're not going to fault them for, I think, taking the gamble on him. We can't do that. We were also saying that it made sense to go for him. And it would be an understandable decision if they went for it. The problem you've had is that at the same time, you've also got other deeper issues in that club right now. And until those are resolved, this club will, I'm sure, be kept in contention because it's USL and, everyone gets a prize. But that still needs to be handled, I think, to see real progress here. And just an assumption that a simple coaching switch will do the job won't do it.
Yeah. Listen, this is kind of harkening us back to when we did the emergency podcast when Danny Stone was appointed head coach of Rising. Listen, we said it then. We thought, given the circumstances, was the right man for the job. I mean, heck, I believe we also even said that even if this was earlier on, he very much could have been a very logical candidate. If you're talking about this was an appointment right after the final was over, right? He had knowledge of the system. He's been with this club since 2021. He has a good rapport with the players. It's a lot of similarities in a way from what Juan Guerra was running within the system. Definitely different, of course, but right, it made a lot of logical sense knowing what he brought to the table. And I think what you kind of fall into with hindsight in all of this is it's not saying that necessarily that was the right or wrong decision, but I think you're kind of having the rock in between a rock and a hard place. If you have a last minute appointment of a head coach, given the circumstances of where Juan Guerra left, taking that assistant coaching role with the Houston Dynamo, and a lack of recruitment that has kind of, I'm not going to say crept up because they knew about it this entire time, but you have a manager coming in at the very last minute with a roster that was not in his image and really didn't have, for all intents and purposes, made in what Danny Stone would have been looking for. Was he maybe consulted? Perhaps. Doubt it, but we'll never know fully. But this is kind of where if Juan Guerra was kind of here within the system, maybe it would have been better this season, perhaps. But it's one of those things. It was such a rock and a hard place where Danny Stone was situated.
I'm gonna butt in slightly. I'm gonna butt in slightly and say that a few sources have indicated to me that Danny was interested in bringing other players in.
Sure.
And did not get the sign off from higher up in that case.
I should.
I'm gonna put that one out there right now and say that
sure
we do need to, I think, be clear. And I mean, I see a lot of comments in the chat. I can see what a lot of people are kind of getting at now with the other people in the club.
I should specify that it was thank you for that context of yes, he had mentioned of players who wanted to be brought in. We should specify it was then not really heard and acted upon. How about that?
Yeah. This is going to be an interesting few weeks, I feel. This is going to be an incredibly... I mean, I can see... And here's the thing, right? Last night and in some of the things on social, we've seen, obviously, there were people who were saying, questioning Danny in general. I'm seeing a lot of aggression right now in our chat.
There is.
There's a lot of people who have a lot of questions, justifiable questions, I think, around the role of other people within the team. And I completely understand those questions. And again, the simple thing here is that if this team can fail in the current setup that they had, with someone who was appointed from within, that they should know better than anybody else, there are serious questions, I think, around the club's processes at large and the qualifications of those people in those positions at large that still have to be addressed. Because, again, just an assumption that you're going to just get lucky again with something here, I don't see that happening. I mean, we're at a point whereby this team right now has far more talent than we've seen. However, I think there's some serious issues that if they're not addressed, this season can be written off already. especially now with a coaching change, especially with, I mean, a coaching change at this point, you've got to get this one right. And again, one person really paying the price in this one in Danny. Remains to be seen. Whatever changes, whatever questions get raised.
Yeah.
I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. But there are so many things. There's so many things that have been off. It's felt this season.
As
And again, I can't pin that all, and it shouldn't all be pinned on Danny. I can. I mean, there are lots of things off field around this club as well that just. Again, it's been one of those. It's been one of those seasons where, I mean, again, especially after last night, right? I may have gone out for a couple of drinks and effectively had to tell the people I was with, do not let me pick up my phone. Because I don't want to go the rabbit hole of looking at all the messages after that last game. It's been one of those seasons.
It's been one of those. Listen, it's even harkening back, right, to the not too distant past, in that 2022 season where you're facing down Rick Chance being let go of his duties, and the feel at the time was given how that season played out, longer time coming, almost an end of an era, right? We saw we're rising, had success before, mainly in the 3 years prior, kind of ran its course, new face, new fresh voice, everything like that. And you kind of felt, okay, this is a new incarnation of the club. Yes, Juan Guerra came on within that midseason break, then supported through the offseason with an entire squad revamp. There was only, 4 players that were left over from the 2022 season going into the 2023 season. It was entirely made in his image, and even though he came on in that during that 2022 season, they had the proper offseason to retool, to establish squad harmony, to bring in players, to have internet friendlies and whatnot in Mexico. There were so many different squad buildings to where even though the 2023 season was slow, there was a sustained and synchronized effort of a unified vision of where this club was going. And the message was, it takes time. You fast forward and look at where this offseason was, the 2023 offseason going into the 2024 season. Rising lost key players at multiple positions. They were not replaced, in not just from a like perspective. They did not bring in other strikers to replace really at all. Remy Cabral aside, yes. Carlos Harvey lost, was not replaced with a same like mentality within those players. We have said multiple times, you are not going to necessarily replicate the same talent that those players had, because those trio of players that were lost in Carlos Harvey, Danny Trejo, and Manuel Arteaga were lost for a reason, because they are very talented at what they do. But you didn't have that same type of recruitment that were backing it. You have the combination of Danny Stone taking over late, and the build up to where we are at now is a very different feel and vibe than when we were at in 2022, where it's less of a walking away from an era and more so this roster that they have in place. It is a roster that is built to compete. It is a roster that, yes, they are missing talent. They are missing pieces, but there is a lot of talent on this roster. And while you may not see the same type of gutting that you could see from a manager, whoever it's going to be in the long term, this feels less like a changing of an era and more of a, we are rotting a bit from the inside. And that is not a fun feeling.
Yeah. I'll be honest, Max. I listened to parts of your thing. I was also having a quick scroll on social to look at this one, and I don't see a lot of positivity here about this move. I see a lot of anger. I mean, I'm just going to read some of the words I'm seeing on Twitter right now. Utter cowardice from members of the front office. Says one person. I'm going to keep scrolling through. A lot of expletives in some of these. Why solve the actual problems when you can just fire the manager? To someone else. I'm so disgusted. Danny deserved better. Thank you for working so incredibly hard. Says another. Please tell me how I can cancel my season ticket because this isn't worth it. In one of the replies, terrible move from the club, rash decision, very disappointing. A lot of people tagging Bobby Dooley in this one. Understandable. The club president. It's.
Are you reading? Are you reading on Twitter or are you reading on Facebook?
I'm reading on Twitter right now.
Okay, because Facebook is even worse. It's not great.
Facebook's even more anti front office, or what?
Yeah, I would say it's pretty anti front office, and there's some there's some pretty choice stuff in here. I'll leave it at that.
I mean, it's wow. Yeah, no, I'm pulling up to Facebook now. I gotta read this. What's going on here? This is yeah.
As you're looking at that, I do want to shout out the people who are in our chat who are making it here yet again.
We're also very overwhelmingly negative. People do not like this.
No, 100%. Reese, Siley, Mama P, Classy Nasty, D Goalie, Bobby, Fat Kid, Devinall, Jared, Emma, what's up, Ems, SE Collective, Daniel Barry, Albert, Benito's Bluebird, the Suns fan for life, Mike M, everyone, Welsh Z, John McP, Brett, you guys, Zanel, I appreciate everyone so much. Calvin, Bullyman, Pat, everyone. You guys are, I appreciate you guys being here. Edward, you guys are, this is, listen, man, this is, I think, one of the most raw kind of moments that we've had on this podcast. And it's really kind of different than where we're at. Again, we've had the highest of highs where we are doing this live after Phoenix Rising win the 2023 USL Championship. We had a low point after, again, Rick Shantz, they parted ways with him, and you're looking through the coaching search. I think this is the most, this is kind of the low. This is the low. This is something that this club has not felt. I'm not going to just say in a while. I mean, you could darn say this is probably this is like the most negative point within the club's history in terms of from a on-field personnel standpoint and the decision when it happened and the resulting aftermath because of it. This is the low point in what this Phoenix Rising Football Club has been through, and it's gonna be interesting. It's gonna be something to see where they go from here.
When Rick Shantz left, there was a sigh of relief from parts of this crowd. I am not seeing that at the moment. I'm not seeing any of that. I will bring up a point made by John in the chat here. Those big game players have let this club down almost every time they walked on the field. The fact they keep getting games does make it as a motive to recoup dollars. Never underestimate as well the fact that sometimes people internally will ask questions like, why are we not, why are we spending this much money on a player that doesn't play? There are certain names that come to mind for that one. I'll leave it that way. I tell you what, you know what? We said earlier we were going to have that little Danny clip from last night again on pressure and just kind of recap where we were, what he said about pressure last night. Let's have a listen. If you look at all competitions, obviously he's only one win now in the last 7 games, especially coming off a particularly rough loss like this. Are you feeling perhaps a little bit more pressure maybe than usual?
I mean, the pressure that's applied is always from within first, and that doesn't change in terms of how we approach this week. What I've said is the reaction needs to be good. I don't think we've had a game like this for a while, and the reaction to this now is the most important factor. And so how we reflect on this and how we evaluate this is one piece, and then the reaction is more important than any of that. So any pressure that's applied doesn't outdo any pressure that myself and the staff and the team will be placing on each other to react in the right way and positively to this.
I feel like this was very much a today decision. From the conversation I was having with Danny yesterday, it didn't feel as though I think I wasn't given a sense yesterday that he was likely to depart, and this surprised me again. It came out of nowhere. My phone just flashed it up pretty much, and then I grabbed my laptop and went to try and find a quieter corner.
When we have people in the chat suggesting former U.S. men's national team strikers replacement, we're in a bad spot. That's not what we want to see. Yeah, man, there's a lot to process. This is not going to be something that we can predict. This is not going to be something that we're going to be even able to answer today. Owen, if you're a betting man or even just any inclination whatsoever, I'm going to ask two questions to you. Number one, when does this team appoint a permanent manager to take place? And number two, who do you believe some of the front runners are?
I don't have any front runners. I can't give you names at the moment.
Okay.
I will add here that it wouldn't hugely necessarily shock me if there was a coach in place by next weekend. Although, as Cody Man Pat is saying, if you're a manager, would you even want this job right now? Fair. I mean, again, we've outlined some of the issues the club has just in the structure of the club. We've indicated the fact there are some. Yeah, I mean, there are people who probably have questions about that. And justifiably so. I don't know. I do know that if the club's choice is, I think, to stick with Diego long term, I feel as though they quite frankly may as well have just stuck with Danny, because I every indication I have from multiple sources is that the locker room is not going to accept long-term Diego as a head coach. I'm not certain that they will accept him short-term, quite frankly. He's very new here. I don't see this resulting in a good outcome in the short term. I just do not. And again, we can acknowledge the fact that there were issues that were probably within Danny's control, but there were also issues that were outside of Danny's control. I'm not going to get into the details on that one, by the way, in terms of the locker room accepting him or not.
Yep.
I think you can read into that as you will, as regard to respect held for certain people.
Yeah. I do agree with you. Listen, if you're going to make this decision and not have someone lined up in the near term to appoint, I mean, yeah, then why do it at this point? The reality is, Phoenix Rising, like you mentioned, is there a possibility that they have someone in place by next weekend? Sure. They have a match again, away to San Antonio coming up this Saturday, July 6th. They then have a week off, and then they return home Friday, July 19th for an El Paso Locomotive showdown. Listen, guys, you're talking about these next two opponents are the bottom dwellers of the Western Conference currently. That July 19th. That is a lot of time to appoint someone, get them up and running into the system, and we're gonna see, because
Max, it's one of those days where you know that this is not just the soft drink right here. Okay.
Oh, it is not, buddy. I know it's not. Yeah, I don't blame you. Yeah, that's honestly going to be quite the inflection point, and one that we thought that out of those two matches, that might be an inflection point for how this season would go and any resulting moves from it. Turns out this timeline is sped up just a little bit further. Man, there's so much we can still talk about, and honestly, we now have some material for next week to kind of dive in further. Owen, what else do you want to cover while we have this emergency podcast and a very captive, active, and grateful audience here?
Oh my gosh. To an extent, I'm not sure how much more there is to discuss at this particular moment in time. I feel as though we've hit on the main point again. This was unexpected in the time frame that it came, even though we knew that he was under pressure there. I feel as though certain elements, I mean, again, I know it came up in the chat way further up, and producer Eric don't bother looking for it, but again, when you hear things like one of the owners was in the South End asking people what they thought about the head coach. If I'm a head coach right now and I see that, I see questions around whether the team at the club were making decisions based on what you presume the football expertise in the club would be suggesting. And you see just how quickly they dispatch Danny in the end. Do you want this job? Do you want that fuss and hassle? Do you want to deal with that kind of nonsense? Or do you pass on it? Phoenix Rising's a big club in this league with a big name. So maybe you can look past that. But the most aspirational managers, do they? That's the question. Because as you'll see with Danny now, the fans don't like it, but he's the one who's taken the fall for this at this point. And now the question, as the swell of negativity comes up, and in some ways this club is perhaps a little bit lucky that they're not playing at home next weekend or the weekend after that. They're 3 weeks away from a home game at this point. Maybe you're lucky there. Maybe you're lucky that the fan negativity doesn't bleed into a stadium. Because if they were playing at home next week, we saw a tifo against Rick, it wouldn't have shocked me to see some incredibly aggressive attitudes towards the club president, the club sporting director at this point. And yeah, there's going to be a lot of reflection that this club is going to have to go through, because this entire process has been, I feel, flawed this season from day one onwards. And I mean, the alternative there is the chat seems to like it here is, hey, it's actually 3 weeks to get the tifo ready. Okay. It wouldn't shock me. Bandidos are not quiet about their views, and never have been. And quite frankly, it's probably the right way to be. You shouldn't be quiet about your views as football fans. This club exists for you. This is your club. Staff come and go, owners come and go, managers come and go, players come and go. The fans are the constant, and the fans should own that, to be honest, in that sense. And I tell you what, I didn't expect this to go down too well when this came, especially if it came at a time like this. This, I think, from a PR standpoint, it is gone a lot worse than I expected. So much worse. I didn't expect the full-on swell of abuse that, in particular, the club president is taking right now. I did not expect it to be quite that vitriolic from as many people as it has been. There are always going to be a few. There always are a few. But the sheer scale looking on social right now is... I'd be worried. I'd be worried if I was Phoenix Rising right now, because you cannot afford to make enemies like that of your fans. Messy. It's a messy situation.
Indeed it is. Listen, we will close this off with this. No matter what happens with this upcoming match, Saturday, July 6th, again, week from today, against San Antonio. I'm not one to say matches are washed or anything like that, but I think, whether it is Diego Gomez in charge, whether it is they have a manager appointed, then okay, so be it. It's not, whether you're going to have this club is going to have a new guy in charge for a matter of days to actually integrate and everything like that. So, okay, whatever. I'm not going to say it's a wash, but I'm going to say it's a darn near close to it. Friday, July 19th, when they return home, you better have a manager appointed. And that's not going to stop any anger coming from the South End from supporters, nor should it. But you better have a plan. You better have time to integrate it. And you better hit the ground running, because this, no matter what happens from the rest of the season moving forward, it does not change the rotting that has happened from within inside the team. But you better darn sure you do your absolute best to make sure it does not get worse. This is the lowest point in this club's history. You do not have to want to say that same sentence again when we're at the end of the season. Appreciate everyone joining us here on a emergency podcast of the PHNX Rising podcast. We truly appreciate you guys so much for joining us 2 times in a span of, oh dear gosh, 18 hours, not even. It's been incredible. You can follow me on Twitter at Max David Simpson. You could follow Owen on Twitter at OJ Evans 18. Oh dear gosh, I almost forgot. Of course, you can follow us on Twitter at PHNX _ rising _. I'm not gonna even try one today.
Hey, if you want an update, would you like an update?
I would love
on me and my travel. Would you love a fun update on me and my travel?
Yeah.
So you know how I changed my flight to be an hour later, so that I wouldn't have to like run like now, because I was supposed to leave here in about 30 minutes from now from the other end of the airport.
Yes.
So I changed it an hour later, and that flight is now running an hour late. So I got 2 more hours here in DFW.
Dear gosh, you guys can DM Owen a beer. I'm gonna be doing so.
You don't need to. It's free in here, Max.
I'm still gonna be DMing you for a beer.
I don't pay in here. I go pour it myself.
Take my free beer. Take my free beer. It's the only thing to make.
You can buy me one when I get back.
I'm still gonna do it now, early. Anyway, you can still do it. DM Owen a beer if you guys feel like it. Yes, as an L double disappointment. There we go. Also, of course, want to shout out Mr. Eric Ruby, ERIKRUBY on Twitter.
He hopped on in about like 5 minutes from the call.
Guys, before this, we were. This is what we do here, and we don't want to do this emergency podcast, but from announcement to going live. Maybe 10 minutes, not even. Shout out producer Eric for that. So,
hey Max, why don't you buy me a beer then? Huh? Buying Owen all his free beers. I'm over here beerless.
Hey, I'm buying you a beer, buddy. I've done you plenty, but I'm gonna get you another one.
You know what? That is fair, Max. You've done your work. It's all good.
You're a good man, Eric. I appreciate you. The voice coming in from behind the screen, but no, we'll get you a free beer. Yes, send Owen a free beer. Send Eric a free beer. Send them Eric's way, especially. You're right. Owen already has them. He's plenty, but appreciate everyone. It's a beautiful game, but it's way more beautiful when this shit doesn't happen. Good day.
We all silly like the mayor.